All right, to get started with responsive web design, we need to actually make sure we have a meta element inside of our HTML page. So I'm just going to create a new file here and change this from plain text to HTML. And I'm using VS Code. This is just the text editor I've chosen. And if I do HTML:5, and I'll make this just a touch bigger. If I do HTML:5, I see this Emmet abbreviation. I can then hit Tab, and it gives me everything I need. It gives me the HTML language, which is nice. It gives me UTF-8 for character encoding, which allows you to have things like emojis on your page. And then we have this line, and this is the important one. The meta name is equal to viewport, content is equal to width is equal to device width, and the initial scale is 1.0. That is important. We want to keep that exactly the way we see it. And what this does is it allows our browser to say, oh, okay, so this is going to be a responsive page. So if you have any pages that you're working on, any websites that you're working on, and you want to make them responsive, make sure you add this to the head section of your page on every single HTML element, or not element, but every HTML. Make sure you have this on every .html file that you have, and that will make sure that your CSS acts the way we want it to act with responsive web design. Okay, let's take a look at the media query syntax. So what I can do here is we can do this in an internal style with the style attribute, or not attribute, the element, or we can do this inside of external CSS. I'm going to do this right inside of this document so you can see exactly what I'm doing with the HTML and CSS side by side. So typically we would select an element like our body, and we could say the background color is going to be blue. And let's save this page as index.html. And mine always changes here. Let's change that back to regular HTML, not Django templates. And so this is going to give us the body element is going to have a background color of blue. Okay, this is going to be ugly, but this is going to be a good demonstration. So let's head on over to our browser. I'm just using Chrome here. I can go over to File, Open File, select my index.html. We have a blue background. Okay, this is pretty ugly, but it gets the point across here. Now what I can do is right-click, Inspect, and your panel might look a little bit different from mine. I think mine is just dark mode, and that's going to be in my settings somewhere. Settings. Yeah, theme, dark, light. Requires a reload. I don't want to reload, but yeah, you can change it there if you like. So what this is doing is allowing us to click this little button here, the toggle device toolbar, and this is going to change the width of our page. And this makes our page responsive. And so it's a lot like shrinking your browser left and right, but this actually does it properly, so it gets a little more accurate this way. We can also say responsive, but also, hey, let's try like an iPhone X or an iPad Pro or things like that, and it'll automatically size it for us. Or we could do just responsive and a regular width here. So most things go based, most responsive web design works off of the width of your device, not the height. And let's go ahead and reset this to 100%. That's huge, and let's just make that smaller. And so, okay, nothing happens here. Responsive web design is when we say, when that device width is a certain width, either larger than, smaller than, or between two sizes, change that background color. And so it looks a lot like this. At media, brackets, max width, and then what width do we want to give it? Let's say 640 pixels. And then we can also say in here, so we're wrapping a media query around more CSS, make that body have a background color of red. And so at 640 pixels and under, because it's going to have a max width, we learned about that in CSS 201. 640 pixels and under is going to change that background color to red. So let's go ahead and refresh this page. And responsive, let's go ahead and change this to 641, nothing. 640 goes red. And we can see when I drag here. Now this is a really good example. It is an ugly example, but it is a really good example of responsive web design. So let's take a look at that syntax once more. I have my regular styling up here, what I normally want to happen. It could be on the body, could be on classes, IDs. You could be selecting by attributes, anything you like. It's your regular CSS that goes up here. And then underneath, we do media, brackets, max width, the width that you want, curly brace, and then your regular CSS in here, and then end that curly brace. And we can actually collapse this as well, so it looks a little more like this. And we just put our CSS, our regular CSS, inside of there. Okay, let's take a look at what mobile first is. You see a lot of people saying mobile first, mobile first. What is mobile first? Mobile first means you are making a website to look great on your phone first. So what I did here was I styled this based on absolutely no rules whatsoever. And we know if there's no media query rule that this styling here is just going to be applied blanket over every device type, every device width. And then what I said was, hey, actually, when that maximum width is 640 pixels or under, that's what max width means, then change this. But mobile first is the idea of doing this opposite. So mobile first would say, hey, make that background of the body red, and then with a minimum width of 640 pixels, change that background color to blue. And so all we're doing here is reversing it. We're saying all the time, make that background color red, and then on a minimum width and up of 640 pixels and up, change that background color to blue. So from that last video to this video, I'm going to refresh this page and we're going to see that nothing actually happens. So let's make this bigger and it stays blue. And then we make it smaller, smaller, smaller. And when we get down to 640, you can see it goes to red. And so that does the exact same thing as what we did before, only we swapped where we're writing our code. So we're saying, hey, everything here needs to be for mobile first. And then on a minimum width and up, we actually want that color to change. And so now we're writing code for phones first and adjusting for a desktop. Whereas in the last video, what we did was we wrote code for a desktop or a tablet or something big. And then we said, hey, actually, when that page width is small enough, change it. And so one is desktop first, one is mobile first. This is mobile first. You're often going to see people saying mobile first is better. Honestly, you're going to see more people writing desktop first CSS more than you're going to see people writing mobile first CSS. Let's take a look at how to make an image responsive, because by default they actually are not really all that responsive. And so let's go ahead and open up a new tab and let's go to unsplash.com. And let's look for some sort of painting. Sure, good enough. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to right click, copy this image, copy this image address, not the image, but the image address. And then I can open this up in my browser. And we have this image. Cool, that works, that's what I want. In our HTML, let's go ahead and add an image. So we have an image in here, img. The source is going to be whatever that URL is, and that alt is going to be painting. When I go back to my page here, I see this image. But this image really isn't responsive until the page gets too big, and then it becomes responsive. That's not always what we want. Actually, with responsive web design, most of the time what we want is to say this image is going to be like 50% of the width all of the time. And so that means even right now, 50%, well, it's clearly not 50%, 50% would be somewhere around here. This should still be shrinking, but it's not. It doesn't shrink until it actually reaches the maximum viewport width. Even then, it doesn't really acknowledge that there's supposed to be a border, not a border, but padding or a margin around the body on the right side there. So things are getting a little quirky here, and we can make this work better with a responsive image. So what we can do is instead of changing our body, we can change our img, and we can give this a width of, let's say, 100% and a height of auto. And that's just going to auto-calculate the height for us. Now, we didn't want 100%, we wanted 50%. And let's just make this bigger, refresh, and you can see that image got smaller, and it stays at 50%. 50% is right in that middle of that X, I believe. So if we go straight down, we can see that that's 50%, and it's going to stay there. No matter what size the page is, it's going to stay there. And so that's responsive. Now, what we can do is we can make this even more responsive, and we can say when the page has a maximum width of 640 pixels, we could make it 100% width. Now, I might have lost you there. So in the last lesson, we talked about responsive first, mobile first responsive web development. let's mix and match these a little bit. So now let's do media, max width, 640 pixels. So it's a lot like this, but the exact opposite. So the syntax is the same, but this is saying from 640 up, this is saying from 640 down. Select that image and give it a width of 100%. Now, because we know how CSS works from the top to bottom, we can say, select that image, give it a width of 50%, give it a height auto, close that image. We don't have to specify height auto down here because all we're doing is overwriting this width here. That's all we're overwriting. It's going to automatically inherit height of auto. So it's a lot like writing height is auto, but our browser is going to inherit that anyways from the code on line 13 here, so we don't need to write that. Let's go ahead and save, refresh, and look at that. Whenever the page goes red, the image gets full width. So 50%, 50%, 50%, 50%, oh, and 100%, all the way down. And so now we have a really responsive image. Welcome back. Let's talk about responsive embeds. So in this video, we're going to take a video, an iframe, and we're going to make it responsive. Now, here's the thing, is when we go to YouTube and we click share, and we get that embed code, this is not responsive by default. And so if I go back to our page, and let's just throw it underneath our image here, HR, and let's paste that, we're going to see it has a width, a hard-coded width of 560, and a hard-coded height of 315. And then a bunch of other junk in there that we don't really need to know about. The SRC is the main one here. This is our YouTube video. So let's go ahead and refresh this page, and let's scroll on down, and we have this video. Now let's say we want this to actually be full width. Well, we can do that by saying width is equal to 100%, but then we have to figure out 100%. What is that height? What is that aspect ratio all the time? We have to figure out that aspect ratio non-stop. And we can't possibly do that. But what we can do is write some clever math to do it for us. And so I'm going to tighten this up so we can hopefully see this all in one line. No, I'll move this up. Iframe is going to go above the image, and the HR is going to go below the iframe. So let's go ahead and minimize those. Now what we want to do here, and this is somewhat of a CSS trick, is we want to wrap a container around this. And so I usually just call it a container, an iframe container, something like that. And really we just need to be able to select this container and select the iframe at the same time. And so what we want to do here is we want to take this container and we want to give it a position relative and hide the overflow. We learned about position relative and hiding overflow and width, what we're going to be using next, all in CSS 101 and CSS 201. So you should be familiar with these already. So let's go ahead and grab this container and let's say position is relative, and the overflow is going to be hidden. This way we just don't show anything that's outside of this box. Let's give this a width of 100%. This is going to be the entire width of our iframe. So instead of saying, hey, respect the width of 560, eventually we're going to say, make this a width of 100% of our page. Now here's where we get a little bit tricky. We're going to say padding top is 56.25%. And this is going to get a little bit weird. And the reason we're doing this is because if we say 16 by 9, so if we go 16 divided by 9, nope, that's the other way around. So if we say 16 by 9, it's supposed to be 9 divided by 16, we get 0.5625. Or if we multiply this by 100, we get 56.25. And so this is just a little bit of basic mathematics right there. So we took 9 divided by 16, that's our aspect ratio, or 16 by 9. And then it gave us a decimal, and then we said times it by 100 to give us the actual number. This is our percentage. That's going to give us a padding top of 56.25%. Now what we want to do is select this iframe. And we don't always have access to this iframe, so let's not give it a class or an ID or anything, but let's say any container that has an iframe inside of it, we could say position, absolute, top 0, left 0, bottom 0, right 0, and this is just going to stretch it out all the way across this container, which also has extra padding on top. It has a 16 by 9 padding on the top. Just for good measure, let's go ahead and give this a width of 100% and a height of 100%. Technically, this is not going to be needed, but it doesn't hurt to have it in there. Let's go ahead and save this page, and let's go back to Google, and when we refresh, not only is the iframe going to be on top, but it's going to take up the entire width of this page. So let's refresh and find out what it's doing here. Look at this. Huge, huge video. And so we can make this responsive by doing this. Hello, 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 responsive embed, and a responsive YouTube video, which is really nice. And so actually what this is doing here is creating somewhat of a nice demonstration. So we've got an ugly desktop site right now, but if we scroll on down to mobile view where the background turns red, things start to click together and it starts to look a little nicer. And that is exactly what we want it to do. We want our site layout to change for the most part with some bits and bobs here and there. We want these things to change based on the width of your device. All right, let's take a look at multiple media queries. So let's go ahead and create a new box, and it's just going to be called box, and we're not going to do anything with it yet. And in our HTML, let's create box in here. Gives me this Emmet abbreviation. Slam that tab key, and we've got a box. So let's say this width is going to be 400 pixels. The height is going to be 400 pixels. There's going to be a border 10 pixel solid black, margin, 50 pixels, and auto, so let's align that in the center. And we're going to change the background color. You know what, let's not change the background color, that's boring. Let's change the border radius. And it's going to have a border radius of nothing by default. So now what we can do is we've written these media queries, one for min width, one for max width. We can put these together. We can say at media, let's say a max width of 1000 pixels and a min width of, let's say, 700 pixels. And then we can select that box again. And we can change that border radius to 50%. So this is going to turn that box into a circle whenever the width is between, not 100, but let's do 1000 pixels. And a min width of 700. So between 700 and 1000 pixels, this is going to be a circle. Every other time, this is going to not have that border radius, so it's going to look like a square. Let's go ahead, refresh, open up Chrome, refresh our page, and we have this box. So let's do this. So we're at 537 right now. If we go up to 700, let's just slowly scroll that up to 700. We're going to see, yep, at 700. Changes to a circle, and then it's going to go all the way up to 1000, and then once it hits 1000, it's going to change from 1000 to a square. So this is saying anytime that this responsive width here is between 1000 and 700, make it a circle. Now again, this is an ugly example, but this is a powerful example to show you that you can use max width and min width together. Okay, let's work with something real. We need to create some sort of layout and make it responsive, because what we've been doing so far is fun, it's cool, but it's not really all that applicable in individual pieces. What we want to do now is create some sort of flexbox layout and basically change it so that when it's viewed from a phone, it actually snaps together nicely. So let's go ahead and create a new file. Let's call this flexbox.html. And I'm going to change that from a Django template to an HTML template. And let's do HTML:5. And it gives us this. That's exactly what we want. And let's go ahead and create some sort of HTML layout here. So we have some sort of container called our grid or our layout. Number sign layout because it's going to be an ID. And let's say we have an ID for nav. Navigation in here. Another ID for sidebar, sidebar in here, and another ID for content, content in here. Now this is not going to look like anything at this point in time because we haven't applied any CSS. So let's go ahead and apply some CSS. Let's use Flexbox. You could alternatively, instead of using Flexbox, use Grid as well. I'm going to use Flexbox because it's a little more popular these days. But grid is also really good practice. So if you're looking for good practice, I would say, hey, try this with Flexbox. And after this video, also try it with grid. So let's go ahead and select this layout. And let's say it's going to be display flex. And we're going to want to make sure that this wraps. And we've learned about Flexbox and CSS 201 as well, so you should be somewhat familiar with this. But I'll take it slow just in case you aren't. Flex wrap, we're going to say wrap. And what this is going to do is instead of making all of these side by side, it's going to say, hey, when these elements are too wide for the page, bump them down onto a new line. And so let's go over here, reuse this tab, File, Open File, flexbox.html. And we don't see anything useful. However, these are side by side, so it is actually doing something useful. It's just we're not quite there yet. Let's go ahead and select that nav by its ID, nav. Let's give it a flex basis of 100%. Let's give this a border bottom, 1 pixel solid, I don't know, CCC, something like that. That might not be dark enough. AAA, a little darker. And let's refresh. Okay, so navigation is up there. It's bumping things down now because we said flex basis is 100%. Let's make that sidebar. Let's give that 20% width. So let's go ahead and select the sidebar using Flexbox. And again, we don't use width here, we use flex basis. So flex basis is going to be 20%. And border right is going to be 1 pixel solid. Let's make it match the navigation, AAA. Okay, that's coming together nicely. And then the content is just going to expand the rest of the page. Actually, it's not going to by default. But we can make it expand the rest. So let's go ahead and select content. And give that a flex basis of 100% minus 20%. So it takes up 100% of the page. Not 100, we want 80% in there. And just so we know where we're working, let's do border 1 pixel solid red. And you've seen me do that pixel a lot. Oh, okay, so this actually runs into an interesting thing. This bumped it onto a new line. What we forgot to do, and we learned about this in CSS 201 as well, was let's select everything. And let's say the box sizing needs to be border box. And this is just going to put it back in there. And so what that did there was it said, hey, there's this red box. It has a width of 80% plus 1 pixel on either side for that border. What border box did, box sizing border box, it said, actually you're 80% including that border. So with the border it's 80%, and that just sort of bumped it in there because this is pixel precision layout. So now let's touch this up a little bit. Let's say the body needs to be, because I just want this to look somewhat decent, the body needs to have a padding of 0, margin of 0, and the navigation should have a padding of 20%. Nope, 20 pixels, not 20%. There we go. Let's do the same thing with that sidebar. Let's see how that looks. Looking pretty good. Let's do the same thing with that content. Okay, so we've got some sort of layout there. Let's give that sidebar and the content a bottom border. So sidebar and content. And all I did there was in VS Code, I clicked in one place, and then I did command click in another. I believe on Windows, it's you click in one place and then it's alt click in another place. We can do border, bottom, 1 pixel solid, AAA. Okay, cool. So we have some sort of layout here. When we make this responsive, it's going to, it's not going to work the way we expect it to work. It's not quite there. It gets a little weird, and that's completely expected. But what we can do is say, at, let's say 640 pixels, we can make that sidebar actually span the entire width and bump this content down just a little bit. And so we can say, at media, and I'll just move that up so you can see that on my screen, at media, max width, 640 pixels. Let's select that sidebar, and let's give it a flex basis of 100%. And let's remove that border right. Border right is going to be 0. And let's also grab that content section, which has a flex basis currently of 80%, and give it a flex basis of 100 as well. So it's going to bump it down. And so what we can do here, because this is basically the same code, let's select both of them. And let's just make this a little bigger, refresh, and when I make this a little smaller, we can see it slides down. You can see how it bumps there into its own little line. That's really nice. That is responsive web development in a nutshell. Now we could go even further with this. Let's go ahead and make this just a little more zoomed in. Now what we could do with this is when we get down to, let's say, 480 is good. Let's say 480 pixels. This is getting to be somewhat of a smaller device size. 475 is actually the device size, so we'll use that. Let's hide the sidebar. So now we can create another media query at media, max width, 475 pixels. Let's take just that sidebar and do display none. Let's hide it completely. And so I'm going to refresh the page. We're at 480 right now, and if I go click here and just down arrow, down arrow, down arrow, down arrow, down arrow, and it hides. You can see that I'm switching between 476 and 475, and it is hiding for me. It's doing exactly what we want it to do. Now that, my friend, is responsive web development in a nutshell. That's really all it is when you make a page smaller or bigger, you're going to hide something, and you're going to basically make something take up more room, less room, or hide it. Or possibly show it if it's only supposed to show up on mobile. Your project is going to be with Flexbox or Grid. You can use either one, whichever one you're more familiar with. What I would like you to do is sort of take off from that last lesson, but I want you to create some sort of page layout. Use Flexbox or CSS Grid, whichever one, again, you're more familiar with. And then make sure you have a navigation, you've got a sidebar, and you've got some content in there. And then when you make your page smaller in width, when you use responsive web development, or that responsive toggle in your browser, this button here, when you use this and you make your page bigger or smaller, I want you to actually do this so it gets bigger. So this takes up not 20%, but 100%. And then hide something. Basically, I just want you to play with responsive web development, but using this layout as an example is a really, really good example, really good usage of responsive web development. So go ahead and give this a shot. Feel free to reference any of my code here. You can pause this video at any point in time and you can take a look at what I have written. Go ahead and give that a shot. Have some fun with it as well, and it doesn't have to be laid out the exact same way I did it. You can lay it out whichever way you like as well. Have some fun with it, make it your own, but most importantly, make sure you have a little bit of experience under your belt before you finish this course with media queries.